Yeah, help.
So how long do I have to do it until I get a six-pack, Mom?
Huh?
How long do I have to do it until I get a six-pack?
I don't know.
Didn't you say like 6 weeks? Well, didn't you say like 6 weeks?
Yeah, maybe 6 weeks.
Okay.
Okay. All right, good morning, everybody. It's good to see you guys, even though some of you I can only see your names. I'm visualizing you that we're all here together in a classroom. So thanks for being here. It may be a little early for some of you, but I appreciate that you're here so we can get started on the written responses for your create performance task. So I've tried to parse it out a little bit so that you guys can work on it a little bit as you go this week. Of course, if you're still working on code and you want to edit code, I'm not going to stop you from changing your code, but I want to remind you that you're not being graded on the code that's separate from the code you choose to write about. So if your algorithm is set and it meets the requirements, be done with that. We've spent a lot of time coding where the most important thing was the final outcome. Like you've got a game and you've written all this code, but it doesn't really work. So we just keep working at it and working at it and working at it. And that's really not what this performance task is supposed to be about. You are supposed to write some code, but really the College Board is asking you to sort of explain, what does that code do? How does it represent abstraction? Why is it an algorithm? And then of course, can you build code sophisticated enough to have embedded algorithms? Once you do that piece, your coding part is done. I mean, you're not taking a coding class. This isn't AP computer science programming. It's principles. And so we're only coding enough to start to try to analyze what are the principles behind this little bit of code that we've written. So try to let go a little bit in your mind that this is about programming and coding and having this really sophisticated program. It's not. It's having a little piece of code, just sophisticated enough, and then how well can you describe the principles that are represented in that code. So this is the week where we're really doing the important work of earning those points in the create performance task. So I've uploaded 2 documents to the Google Classroom, and I'm going to pull those up in just a minute and share a screen with you guys, and walk you through what do those writing pieces need to look like. And I'm going to ask you guys today and tomorrow to be working on the writing for 2A and 2B. 2A is kind of tricky because it's talking about the purpose of your code, and some of you may feel like you would want to make your video first before you wrote 2A, but you don't have to do that. Your video does not have to have narration over the top, although you can have that. You can talk while your video is running, but I would probably recommend that writing it out is going to guarantee that you put in all the requirements as opposed to just winging it and talking through your video. So I'm going to ask you to, even if you haven't made your video yet, which I'm assuming most of you haven't, just be willing to write out section 2A. And then of course we can keep coming back to this. Nothing that you write this week is set in stone until May 26th when you actually submit it. So this week the goal is to write. Next week, after we finish the last writing, section 2D, we'll come back to it like Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of next week, and you'll have multiple days to go back and revise stuff. Like an hour. Okay. All right, so I'm going to pull up this document. First, I want to pull up 2A. Let me find that really quick. Okay, here we go. So 2A. So this comes from the College Board. And so they give you the prompt. What are you supposed to do? They give you some advice, and then they give you some sentence starters. So let's just look at this really quickly. So prompt 2A, provide a written response or audio narration. And again, even if you're planning on doing the audio narration for your video, I would still encourage you to write it out first to make sure that you're hitting all of the requirements. We want to identify the programming language, right? So I'm using Python, I'm using JavaScript, I'm using block code in Scratch, or I'm using Java, whatever it is that you're using. What is the purpose of your program? So the purpose of my program is to entertain people. It's a game. The purpose of my program is to educate people. It's a quiz on Spanish or US history. The purpose of my program is to, it's a calendar, it's a calculator. It helps people do X, Y, and Z. So whatever the purpose of your program is, if you aren't super sure about purpose, you can talk a little bit about functionality, like what does it do? So I would argue that a calculator, its purpose and its functionality are the same. It functions by doing calculations. And that, of course, is also its purpose. So depends on what kind of program you've written. But certainly if it's a game, the purpose is entertainment, but then you can talk through like how the game works a little bit, like what the rules are, to explain what the video illustrates. Next week, when I walk you through the video, you can just add this. It can just be a couple of quick sentences at the end of 2A after you make your video. What aspect of the game were you showing in your video? Okay, so here's the advice from the College Board. The video must run continuously. So what we'll probably do for all of you guys next week is have you run your program. We'll use some screen capturing software of some kind, and then we'll have to probably convert that screen capturing software into one of the approved video file formats, so MP4, WMV, AVI, or MOV. We want to showcase one feature. Remember the maximum amount of time is 1 minute in length. So I don't think you should be worried about like, well, what if I'm only 30 seconds? Is that not enough? it's fine as long as you're meeting the requirements. So if you are showing one feature of your program, one major feature that runs, that's good enough. If that only takes you 30 seconds to run it, right? If you have a tic-tac-toe game, run the game, show how it starts, show how each player moves, and then if you can get it to show how someone, you know, wins, ties, or loses, that's fine. You might have a game that asks you if you want to play again, or best 3 out of 5. You don't need to show all of those features. So it's okay if your video is fairly short. In fact, the people that are grading this probably appreciate having a shorter video that's concise and gets to the point of your program. So, describing the purpose. The purpose of your program is the intended goal or objective. It is what the program is supposed to do. If you've made up a game, an app, or other kind of project, note that it is a game and quickly describe how it works. So it's okay to just say it's for entertainment, it's a game, here's how it works, or here's how it would be played. So just the basic rules, you don't have to go into lots of details, right? And then lastly, in the last little sentence, as we talked about, make sure you connect the purpose of your program to what is shown in the video. So if you've talked about, in my game, you have to guess this, then show me that the video is, this is where you would get the clues to help you guess. Or if your game, again, is like Mad Libs, you might say, this is the part of the game where the player enters in all the values. So always tie back whatever's in the video to the purpose of the game. So the College Board gives you some sentence starters. All right, so I would be wary of these sentence starters. It's just a way of telling you one thing that you can do. What I like about their sentence starters is they show you how direct you need to be. We talked about this when we were working on the Explore in the fall. Make it very easy for the reader. Be super direct. My program is written in this language. The purpose of my program is, in the video, I am showing this function and it's related to the purpose of my program by, make it really clear and really obvious, okay? So, great sentence starters from the College Board. However, those are suggestions. If every single one of you uses one of these sentence starters exactly as written, I would be worried, oh, this should not say warn. I would be a little concerned that the College Board might look at this and say, why is every student from this class using these exact same sentences? So be careful that you don't accidentally flag yourself for plagiarism. Sentence starters are only suggestions, okay? So do try to put things in your own words, but just make sure that those words are straightforward. We are not an English class. We are not trying to write a literary essay, and we're not going to get brownie points for really fancy adjectives or elaborate vocabulary. Make it as clear and as straightforward as possible for these readers, okay? All right, so this is where I'm going to have you guys sort of draft out your response for 2A. Remember that when I look at this, I can't give you feedback on this. So if you are uncertain if your response meets the requirements, I've given you a little checklist. Written response. And if you want, you can go through with your document and you can highlight, right? So like, here's my response. This is my response. The language I use to program is JavaScript, right? So you might say, well, here I identified the language I used in yellow, so I'm going to make this one yellow. And here is in my code where I identified the purpose in green. The purpose of my program is to entertain because it is a game. So then you could say, well, this is where I did this thing right here. So it's a lot like the way we were doing the grading on the samples that came in from the College Board, right? And then this is where I describe the feature in the video. The feature is ... right? So this is where I describe the feature. I'll do that in blue. I mean, you can literally walk through your response and highlight these check marks and see if you can find that in your response. That's the absolute best way to check to see if you are doing all the things that the College Board is asking you to do. Okay, so this last one's not really a checkbox. It just says, hey, if you don't want to write a written response, this could have been an audio commentary over the top of your video, and that's okay too. But again, if you're planning on doing that, I would say maybe here you could just write out what you're planning to say, like your script or your narration, so you can make sure you have everything in. Okay. All right, so that's 2A. Write this one. Okay, and then if you have questions, we can go back to the time where we practiced writing 2A when we did our Mad Libs write-up, and we can talk through that one together if you want. But once you've written this, I cannot give you feedback on it, so use the checklist. All right, so the next thing I want to walk you through is 2B. But before I do that, I want to field any questions from any of you guys on section 2A. So if you have a question, just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question now. And everybody okay on 2A? So this document is in Google Classroom. You'll draft your response here, and then later I'll have you move everything into the final document you'll submit to the College Board. That'll be a PDF. Okay.
Miss Gilson,
Yes.
the link on the Google Doc isn't taking me.
This
It
link,
isn't taking me to the studio on like how to record my video. Yeah.
huh. Does it take you to this page at all?
No, it says your teacher didn't expect you to be here.
Okay, what I'll do then maybe is I'll grab this one right here, making a video of a screen capture. I'll just put that in Google Classroom. Oh, this is it right here. Use Screencast-O-Maggot or use Snagit from TechSmith. All right, I will put those links. Thank you for bringing that up. I will put those links into Google Classroom for you. And we're going to talk about this next week when we have our day where I'll walk you through making a video and help you with any tech problems that you run into as you're making your screen capture of your video running, and then of course converting it to one of the appropriate files. So you're not on your own on that. Making that video, if you aren't sure how, I'm absolutely going to walk you through that. We'll have a whole day where that's kind of like what we do. I'll help you get to the software, find it, make sure it's the right length, and then if it's not the right format, I'll show you how to convert that. Okay, anything else from 2A before we go on to 2B? Okay. All right, let's go to 2B. Right one, 2C, 2B. All right, so this is your Create 2B submission checklist. This is also in Google Classroom. So here's the prompt for 2B. Describe the incremental and iterative, remember iterative means to keep coming back to it, like to loop back, your iterative development process of your program, focusing on 2 distinct points in that process. Describe the difficulties and/or opportunities you encountered and how they were resolved or incorporated. In your description, clearly indicate whether the development described was collaborative or independent. At least one of these points must refer to an independent program development. So when we talked about writing your program journal, the big thing was that as you were journaling, you were keeping track of those changes that you made to your program, right? So your journal is where you are going to be looking to write section 2B. You need to pick out two distinct elements from that process where you either ran into an issue and you had to go back and change something, or you had an idea and you went back and you changed something. So going back, that's the iterative process. I worked on it and then I went back and I changed something and then I worked some more. Then I changed something else and then I worked some more. So remember that you need to talk about your development process of your program, and it can't just be your planning. It can't just be what I was thinking. It's the actual process of writing the code. Describe the difficulties and or opportunities. So it can be either a troublesome thing or an idea you had, and then how you integrated that idea or how you resolved that difficulty. So there are many individual pieces of information you need to fit into this response. Use the checklist at the bottom carefully to make sure you don't miss any. Here are the important pieces to remember. First thing from the College Board, they say don't forget the overall process. So you're referencing your developmental process as a whole, not just any 2 points in time. So remember, your iterative process is, I'm making this whole program, here's how I kept going back and adding things and changing things and moving things forward. Your difficulty or opportunity. Your difficulty could be a bug in your code. So that could be something as syntax. Some of you ask me like, well, what if the only thing I forgot to do was write import random? Well, that's okay. It seems like a small thing, but that is a difficulty, right? It's a problem because you forgot that that was an important part of what it takes to make the code run. You ran it, it wasn't working, you realized why it wasn't working, and you resolved it. An opportunity is an idea or a realization that you had as you developed your code. So it could be, I realized this could be coded so much simpler if I used a list. So I went back and I built one. Or I realized that this code would run so much more efficiently if I built a function out of this algorithm and just called the function. So I did that. I realized that instead of doing X, Y, and Z repeatedly, I could just write a loop. And so I did that. So those would be examples of opportunities. It's places where you had a thought or an idea, and then you went back and you edited that code or changed your code to reflect that idea that you had. Feedback, testing, and reflection. So in your journal, I asked you to sort of mark how you came about your changes. And I think there was a place for you to highlight, did you get feedback? And that feedback could be you ran your code and it gave you an error. Your testing, you ran it and it just didn't work the way you wanted it to work, and therefore you knew it wasn't working right. We've talked about using the console log before to get it to print messages. So maybe you're printing something and you're realizing, oh, it's doing something different than I thought it was supposed to do. I printed the output and the output wasn't working. Something like that, right? So tell me how you came to that. Personal reflection, feedback from a peer. So remember, your code has to be written independently. Your difficulties or your opportunities, there's two of them. Only one has to be independent. The other one could be like collaborative. Like I worked on it with a partner, or I asked my friend to look at my code and they helped me. So only one of them has to be independent. The other one can come from some help. That's why it says feedback from a peer. So if you've developed your program completely independently, say so. I wrote this entire code independently. I didn't have any help. I wrote this by myself. If you've developed your program collaboratively, your parts that you are taking a picture of and submitting in your writing, those must be done independently. But there could be lots of other parts of your code that you worked on with a partner. So indicate any parts that were done collaboratively and state which difficulties or opportunities were done independently or collaboratively, but remember you have to have at least one that's independent. So again, here's some sentence starters. I completed this project. Did you do it alone, on my own, independently, collaboratively? So collaboratively could be with a partner. Independent could be I completed this project on my own, or I developed this project on my own, or I have written this code by myself. So again, these are sentence starters. They're a way of helping you think about how to be really, really clear, but we don't have to use them word for word, and we probably shouldn't. I began developing my program how? So again, I don't want you to think this is about like, well, I thought about all the different games I could make. This isn't about your thinking process. It's about your writing code process. So what did you do first? I wrote out the main program, and I thought of all the functions that would need to be called. And then after I wrote out all the functions that would need to be called, then I went back and I actually coded what those functions were independently. Or I thought of all the variables that I would need, and I created all those variables and set their initial values. What were the very first steps that you went through? Think about when I asked you to code those collaborative games and you did them 100% from scratch, right? You worked with a partner. And one of the first things that I asked you to do was just go in and put all the comments in, right? Like this function does this function does this. This is where I would call the main code. The main code would call these functions. That pseudocode planning process, that could absolutely be a first step, right? And then what did you do after? So how did you work iteratively, right? How did you continue to build your project? What did you do next? Did you ever have to go back and change anything? Did you ever have to go back and add anything? Was there something that wasn't working, right? And then where did you run into problems, right? So it could be early on in your code, you ran into problems. There was code that wasn't working correctly. You realized you needed an extra function. You realized that your code wasn't working as intended. You made a variable local versus global. You forgot to import simple GUI or random or whatever it is. And then of course, if you're mentioning one of your two opportunities or difficulties, you always have to talk about how you solved it. How did you resolve it? Or how did you integrate it in your program? And one of those has to be independent, and you cannot assume that the College Board is going to know that you did it independently. So you have to say, I solved this problem by doing this, and I did that independently. Or I realized my code wasn't working by testing it, and so I fixed it by doing this, and I knew how to fix it just by my own reflection. I did it by myself. Being very clear, being very explicit, okay? So you're using section 2B, really use that journal. Talk about the two places. Talk, if you are thinking about your journal and you logged 4 days, start at the beginning and start describing what did you do in those 4 days. And you don't have to describe everything, okay? But you have to have at least 2 points where you talked about an integration of an opportunity, or where you talked about a problem, how you integrated it, or how you resolved it, and then whether or not you did it independently or collaboratively. Okay, so this is where you're going to put in your writing for section 2B. Okay, and then make sure you're doing a word count on these, because you cannot exceed 200 words. I wouldn't worry about the word count until the very end. I would just write and put everything in, and then later you can wordsmith it or simplify it or edit it down to 200 words once you kind of have all your thoughts out. All right, so here is your checklist. And again, if this is my response and you were supposed to describe your overall development process, my overall development process started when I wrote some pseudocode. The next thing was, right? So what am I doing? Am I talking about my overall development? That's here, right? And then am I talking about whether or not I did something independently or with a partner? I wrote the function game independently, right? So Did I do it independently or with a partner? And I can say, all right, this is where I did this section right here. So again, I can kind of color code my checklist in my own response. Okay, so one difficulty I encountered was I resolved this independently by, okay, so here's my first difficulty. Okay. I can make that blue. So is that enough? No, that's not enough, because the next thing I have to do is I have to determine and describe, did I resolve that through feedback, testing, or reflection? I reflected on it and realized it was wrong. Okay, so now I've done this one, right? And did I talk about whether or not I did it independently or, yes, there it is, independently. All right, there's number one. There's my first difficulty. And I made sure that I talked about all the things I was supposed to talk about. One opportunity I had was to create a list to store I don't know, clues more efficiently. So this might be my next opportunity, right? So in my next opportunity, I might say, okay, now I'm on my second opportunity, and here's all the places where I'm coding my second opportunity. So I'm going to make sure that in my response, all of these things, every single one of these things is up here somewhere, right? And you should be able to use this checklist, color code it against your own writing to make sure that you've included everything, okay? So that's what I want you guys to do with your 2 reflections over the next couple of days. Okay, read them carefully, look at the advice from the College Board, think about how their sentence starters, I love that they are so direct. They get right to the point. It's impossible for a reader to read your response and not be able to identify your difficulty or how you worked on something or how you solved something, because your sentence is literally going to start with, I solved this problem by. I integrated this opportunity independently. You're going to use those phrases that are going to make it absolutely crystal clear and easy to identify for the reader of your response to find that you did everything they asked for. Okay, so you're going to write here and then you're going to color code and make sure that you've hit all of the checklist items. Okay, and that's how you'll know you have it just right. Okay, I'm going to pause for just a minute and I'm going to ask you guys if you have any questions or if there's anything you want me to clarify on this. There is one more document that I want to share with you guys before I move away from this, and it's in Classroom. Let me go in here for just a second. It's under grading report. Okay, you guys go into the grading report. I posted this on April 20th. This is the document that the readers of all of the submitted work from 2018 put together, and they give feedback on what did they see as they were reading, like what % of students got the different grades, right? So I think we talked about this before, right? So how many people got a 5? How many people got a 4? What % of people were those, right? But what's cool about the grading report is if you scroll down, they actually go through and talk about what were some common misconceptions that they noted from the responses. So once you've written yours, you can go back and look at this document and you can say, oh my gosh, did I have a response that demonstrated understanding, or was I one of these people that had a common misconception? And so the College Board is telling you that in response to A, one of the things that they saw that's the wrong thing to do is to submit screenshots, right? Or a very short video. So how short is very short? I don't know, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Your video needs to be long enough to clearly illustrate the program running. So this says high scoring submissions include a full length video, not screenshots, approximately 1 minute long. So I think probably 1 minute approximately. 50 seconds to me is approximately 1 minute. I don't think you have to be worried that it's not exactly 59 seconds. Remember, you cannot go over 60 seconds. So don't be too worried about trying to get right up against 1 minute. As long as your video clearly illustrates the program running and one aspect of your program that's tied to the overall purpose. What was something else that people made a mistake on in section 2A? They failed to clearly describe the purpose of the program. So clearly describing the purpose of the program, remember, if it's a game, just say that it's a game, and then instead of feeling like, well, what's the purpose of the game? Talk a little bit about the functionality. How does your game work? What's the objective? How does the play roll out? Okay, and again, that does not have to be in the video, it can also be written. So a high scoring response would demonstrate the purpose of the game. The purpose of the program is to have the user plan its placement and attacks to take over every cell and win the game. So the purpose of the program, it is a game, and then notice that they just start talking about the play of the game. How do you win the game? You plan placement and attacks. The goal is to take over every cell, and that is how you win. You should be able to talk about how to play and win your game within 2 sentences. We're not talking about a whole paragraph here. So here's what the College Board had to say about response 2B, developing a program with a purpose. So what were some misconceptions that students have? They wrote exclusively about the time they spent brainstorming ideas. The College Board does not just want to hear about the time you spent thinking, okay? So they also noted that a lot of extensive descriptions of work done independently or collaboratively. They don't really need to know about the thinking part, okay? So look over here. High scoring submissions describe the overall development of the program, which included, and they talk about some various aspects of the program. How does the user interact with it? How did you develop that? What did that look like? Is there a button that gets started? Do you have to type something in? Do you click things? How does the user interact with your program or your game? That's the user interface. The algorithmic components needed for the program. The algorithms, how do they work? What decides if you win or lose? How do you decide if the player's right or wrong? What do the variables do? How do they help with the overall purpose of the game? And what was your debugging and testing process? Did you do it as you went? Did you debug and test each individual function? Did you debug and test it multiple functions together? Did you make one level and make sure it worked and then add a second level? What's that process look like? That's what they want to hear about, the actual creation, not just your thoughts on it. And then you were supposed to describe some difficulties. So here's some things the College Board does not want you to do. Your difficulty cannot be, I had a difficult time deciding what to make. That's not what they mean by a difficulty. So a misconception or a gap would be, do not describe difficulties in determining what kind of program to make. That is not a part of your development process. Here's someone who identified difficulties but could not describe how they were resolved. So if you're describing a difficulty and you're not saying how you resolved it, so remember feedback, reflection, or testing, and you're not talking about what you did to resolve it, you're going to have a low score. Also, They don't want to know, they don't want you to identify learning the skills as your resolution process. To resolve this, I learned how to code a circle. They want to know, how did you change the code? Okay. Lastly, identifying a difficulty and an opportunity encountered during the development of the program, and clearly indicating what was done to address the situation. Okay. I guess they just want you to be more clear on that. So let's look at what you would need to do to get a high score. Have details about portions of your program that weren't functioning properly. So what was working, what was not working, or what was working, but it didn't really quite work the way you intended. Those are great things to talk about. That doesn't necessarily mean you had an error, although you absolutely could describe errors. How did you find those errors? Were they pointed out to you by a peer? Did you test it? Were you having things print to the console and noticing that it was printing in the wrong place? Did you get an error bug? Did you have a bug that gave you an error code when you ran it? Those kinds of things. How did you resolve them? Did you resolve them independently, or did you resolve them with a partner? And just remember that one of them out of the two has to be independent, so make sure you're specifying which one of those it is. High scoring submissions clearly describe what was done to resolve difficulties or incorporate opportunities. So they give you an example here. I used the debugger to determine that my loop count was off by 1. Okay, that's a great one. I corrected it, the corresponding code, and the program worked as expected. Or they don't want you to just say, I fixed a problem in my program. Well, how did you fix it? I debugged it, or I got it to print to the console log so I could see that it wasn't printing what I thought it was printing. My index of my list was off by 1. I checked it by having it print the index to the console, and I saw that it was printing the wrong index. They want to know what you're doing to resolve or figure out that it's broken, and then how to fix it. Not just, I saw that it wasn't working and I fixed it. So after you write your responses for 2A and 2B, it may be helpful to go back to this document. Again, this is in Google Classroom. This is the Chief Reader Report, and it lists out common mistakes that are made by students when writing. Okay, so I'm gonna take a minute to open this up to questions if you guys have any questions, and then I'm gonna let you go and have you guys get started. I'm gonna ask you to write today and tomorrow, and then on Thursday we're gonna have another check-in where I'll go over how to do the writing for section 2C. So you basically have today and Wednesday, and then I'm gonna ask you to be finished by Thursday so that you're ready to start on part 2C. 1 second. So thanks everybody for attending this morning. If you are ready to go and you feel like you know how to get started, go ahead and get started. These documents are all in Google Classroom. And then if you have any questions, you're welcome to stay on, and I'll post this video in Classroom. All right, thanks everybody. Good luck writing this week, and have a great week. I'll see you guys hopefully on Thursday.
Thank you.
Bye everybody.
Bye. Have a nice day.